Clara Bennett didn't cry when the letter was put in her hands. She didn't shake. She didn't collapse onto that platform bench the way every woman in Millard Creek seemed to be waiting for her to do. She stood straight, held the envelope against her chest like a shield, and let the silence swallow her whole. 5 states. 19 days on a train. One promise that turned out to be nothing but ink on paper. If you've ever been left standing somewhere you weren't supposed to be alone, you already know exactly how Clara felt in that moment. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1884 arrived in Millard Creek, Arizona territory, like it arrived every year, hard, dry, and without apology. The kind of heat that pressed down on a person's shoulders and reminded them exactly where they stood in the world. And on the morning of July the 9th, the Southern Pacific pulled into the depot at 10:30, and nobody waiting on that platform had any particular reason to pay attention to the woman stepping off the second-to-last car. Nobody, that is, until they realized she was alone. Clara Bennett was 27 years old, and she had the kind of face that people underestimated exactly once before they figured out their mistake. Dark eyes, steady jaw, hair pulled back so tight it looked like a decision. She stepped onto the platform carrying a single leather suitcase in her left hand and a small traveling bag looped over her right wrist, and she stood there for 1 full minute scanning the crowd the way a person scans a room when they're looking for something specific. She was looking for a man named Douglas Hale. Douglas Hale was 39, owner of the Rimrock cattle operation, 11 miles east of town, and 3 months ago he had written Clara a letter through the Westward Correspondence Agency in Boston. He described himself as a serious man of means looking for an intelligent woman capable of managing a household and keeping proper accounts. He had used the word intelligent twice in the same paragraph. Clara had noticed that. It was the reason she'd written back. 4 letters later, he'd asked her to come west. She had said yes. And now she was standing on a platform in 104 degrees of Arizona heat, and Douglas Hale was not there. For the first few minutes, she told herself he was simply late. Ranchers ran on different schedules than city people. She understood that. She set her suitcase down beside her feet, folded her hands in front of her waist, and waited with the particular patience of a woman who had learned that showing emotion in public was a luxury she could rarely afford. At the 10-minute mark, the station agent, a thin man with a collar that was too large for his neck, walked over and held out an envelope. "Miss Bennett," he said. He wasn't looking at her face when he said it. He was looking somewhere past her left ear. "This was left for you this morning." Clara took the envelope. She looked at it for 1 moment. Her name was written on the front in handwriting she recognized from 4 months of correspondence. She broke the seal and unfolded the single page inside, and she read it standing there on the platform in the full sight of every person who happened to be watching. The letter was short. "Miss Bennett, I have reconsidered. The arrangement will not suit. I am sorry for the inconvenience of your travel. I have left $10 with the station agent to cover return fare. D. Hale." She read it once. Then she folded it exactly along its original creases, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked the envelope into the outer pocket of her traveling bag. Then she looked up. The station agent was still standing there. He held out a small fold of paper money with the same expression a man uses when he's handing something to someone he feels sorry for but doesn't want to touch. "The $10, he said. "Keep it," Clara said. Her voice was perfectly level. "I won't be needing it." She picked up her suitcase. That was when the trouble started, because the suitcase didn't move right. The leather handle had been fine on the train, but here on the depot platform, the wooden planks were uneven, warped by summer heat, and one corner of the case had dropped into a gap between 2 boards. When Clara pulled, the case held. She adjusted her grip and pulled again harder, and the leather handle let out a sound like it was thinking about giving way. She didn't ask anyone for help. That was the thing people would remember later when they talked about that morning. She didn't look around. She didn't say a word. She just stood there, working the problem with the focused quiet of a woman who had been solving her own problems since before she could remember. The crowd on the platform had grown without Clara particularly noticing. Millard Creek was not a large town, and a train arrival was one of the few reliable entertainments available on a Tuesday morning. There were maybe 30 people standing around ranchers waiting on freight women who'd come to meet the mail, a cluster of men outside the feed store across the road, who had no particular reason to be looking at the depot, but were looking anyway, and they were all watching Clara Bennett fight with a stuck suitcase. A woman in a yellow dress standing near the depot wall said something to the woman beside her, and both of them made the kind of sound that isn't quite a laugh, but is close enough to count. A man in a brown coat leaned over to his companion and said something Clara couldn't hear, but she saw the other man's mouth pull sideways in a smirk. "She come all the way from back east," someone said loudly enough to carry. "And Douglas Hale sent her a letter." Someone else said, "That's what happens when a woman gets above herself, I reckon." Clara's jaw tightened. That was the only thing that moved in her face. She pulled on the suitcase handle again, and this time the case shifted a half-inch, and then the handle seam gave a single sharp pop, and the leather cracked along its top edge. Not broken through, not yet, but close. Clara released it immediately and crouched down beside the case to assess the damage, and the position put her lower than everyone around her, and she felt the humiliation of that fact with the same clarity you feel the edge of a blade. She was crouching on a depot platform in a town where she knew no one in front of people who were already laughing at her with a broken suitcase and no plan and $11.40 in her traveling bag. And the man she'd come 1,500 miles to meet had left her a $10 apology and hadn't even had the decency to deliver it in person. She breathed in slowly through her nose. She breathed out. She was not going to cry. "Ma'am?" The voice came from her left low and unhurried, and Clara turned her head to find a pair of boots standing about 2 feet away from her suitcase. Brown leather worn at the heel, dusty from the kind of roads that were more rock than dirt. She looked up. He was tall, the kind of tall that you had to adjust your chin to see properly. Somewhere around 38 or 40, with dark hair that was a shade too long under the brim of a weather-beaten hat. His face was the kind of face that spent most of its time outdoors, and showed it jaw-set and sun-darkened, with lines at the corners of his eyes that came from squinting at distance, rather than from laughter. He was looking at her suitcase, not at her. His thumbs were hooked in his belt, and his shoulders were easy. The way a man's shoulders are easy, when he's standing somewhere he has a right to stand and knows it. "The board's warped," he said, crouching down beside her without ceremony. He put one hand flat against the suitcase bottom and tilted it slightly, freeing the corner from the gap between the planks, and then he straightened up and lifted the case like it didn't weigh anything at all. He set it on a solid section of platform and stepped back. He still hadn't looked directly at her. "Handle's cracked, but it'll hold if you don't drag it," he said. He looked at the handle, then at the crowd, and then finally at Clara. His eyes were dark brown, the kind of dark that didn't give much away. But they were paying attention. "You're Miss Bennett," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am," Clara said. She straightened up. She was not going to adjust her hair or smooth her skirt, or do any of the things a woman did when she was trying to recover her dignity in front of people who'd just watched her lose it. She just stood straight and looked at him. "And you are?" "Caleb Whitaker," he said. "I've got a ranch up the North Mountain Road, Silver Pine." He paused. "I was here for fence wire." "I see," Clara said. "Then you didn't come for me." "No, ma'am," he said. "But I'm here now." There was a silence. Around them, the platform noise continued, people moving, boards creaking under feet, someone shouting across the road about a freight delivery. But between the two of them, there was a stillness that felt separate from all of it. "Douglas Hale isn't coming," Clara said. She didn't make it a question because it wasn't one. She'd understood that the moment she opened the letter. Caleb looked at her steadily. "I know," he said. "Heard about it this morning." "Of course you did," Clara said. Her voice didn't crack. She was proud of that later. "In a town this size, I imagine everyone's heard about it by now." "Some of them," Caleb said. He glanced at the crowd. Something in his expression shifted, a tightening around the mouth, and he looked back at Clara. "You have somewhere to go tonight, Miss Bennett?" Clara held very still. This was the question she'd been turning over in her mind since she'd read the letter. She had $11.40 a suitcase and the name of the town's only hotel written in her correspondence notes. She was too far from the train to reach Boston before those funds ran out, and too far from anyone she knew to wire for money in time to matter. "I'm considering my options," she said. The corner of Caleb's mouth moved not quite a smile, but something like the acknowledgement of one. "Ma'am," he said, "it's 104 degrees and the hotel in this town charges $3 a night and the sheets aren't clean." He picked up her suitcase. She started to object, and he simply continued past her objection as if it hadn't happened, and he turned to face the crowd on the platform. The 30 or so people watching had gone quiet in the way that crowds go quiet when something is about to happen. Caleb's voice when he spoke wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "This woman came here under a promise," he said. "A promise made by a man in this county who didn't have the backbone to keep it or the decency to deliver his apology in person." He looked at the crowd the way he might look at a stretch of bad terrain, assessing it, finding it unimpressive. "She won't be standing on this platform alone while people make jokes at her expense. Not today." Nobody said anything. The woman in the yellow dress had stopped making sounds that weren't quite laughs. The man in the brown coat was looking at his boots. Caleb turned back to Clara. "I have a house that's larger than one person needs," he said simply, and without particular feeling, the way a man states a practical fact. "I have a spare room. I could use someone who can handle accounts. The foreman told me last month my ledgers are a mess." He held out her suitcase. "It's honest work for honest pay, and the arrangement ends whenever you decide it does. You have my word." Clara looked at him for a long moment. She was not naive. She knew how this looked to the people watching. She knew what they would say about a woman who accepted a stranger's charity within an hour of being publicly humiliated by one man. And she knew that in a town this size, those words would follow her for as long as she stayed. She also knew that she was standing on a depot platform in July heat with $11 and nowhere to go, and a cracked suitcase, and that this man had just done something that nobody else on that platform had considered doing. He had stood beside her. He had said out loud, in front of witnesses, that what happened to her was wrong. Not because she was helpless, because she was a person. "You said your ledgers are a mess," Clara said. "Badly," Caleb said. "For how long?" He considered. 3 years. Clara reached out and took her suitcase from him. She held it by the body rather than the damaged handle, and she lifted it without struggling. "You'll be paying me from the first week, Mr. Whitaker," she said. "I don't work on credit." "Fair enough," he said. "And I'll need a proper workspace, a table good light, not a corner of a barn." "Kitchen table," he said. "South-facing window." "Then we have an agreement," Clara said. She walked off the platform. Caleb Whitaker fell into step beside her, carrying the fence wire he'd come to town for, and behind them the crowd watched them go, in a silence that had shifted from amusement to something considerably less comfortable. 3 men at the edge of the platform watched Caleb Whitaker walk away with the woman from the train, and one of them, a heavy-shouldered man named Pruitt, who ran a dray operation on the south end of town, spat off the platform edge and said, "Whitaker's taking in strays now." Nobody laughed. The station agent closed his window. The woman in the yellow dress said quietly, and to no one in particular, "I don't think she's a stray." The wagon road north out of Millard Creek climbed for about 4 miles before the country changed, before the red dust gave way to something darker and cooler, before the scrub brush thickened into real timber, and the sky above the ridge lost some of its blank white glare. Clara sat on the wagon bench beside Caleb Whitaker and watched the landscape shift, and didn't say much because she was doing the kind of thinking that required quiet. She had $11.40. She had a skill set. She had a commitment from a stranger whose word she had accepted entirely on the basis of 40 seconds of observation. She thought about what she'd observed. He hadn't touched her. He'd touched the suitcase practically efficiently to move it, but he hadn't touched her arm or her elbow, or made any of the contact that men made when they were trying to steer a woman somewhere. He'd stood beside her instead of in front of her. He'd addressed the crowd rather than managing her. And there was a difference between those two things that Clara understood precisely. He had offered her work, not rescue. He'd named the thing she could do for him, the ledgers, before he'd named the thing he was offering her. That was the right order. "How many head?" she asked. He glanced at her sideways. "Pardon?" "Cattle," she said. "How many head are you running?" He faced forward again. "Started the season with 212. Lost 6 to a river crossing in May. 206 now." "And your operating costs, do you track them monthly or seasonally?" A pause. "My foreman keeps a tally." "That's not the same as tracking," Clara said. "A tally tells you what you spent. Tracking tells you whether what you spent made sense." The horse's hooves hit the road in a steady rhythm. A hawk crossed somewhere above the pines to their left and disappeared. "You did this work before," Caleb said. It wasn't quite a question. "I worked for a law firm in Boston for 6 years, Clara said. "I kept their accounts and managed their correspondence and organized their records. When their senior partner retired, they replaced me with his nephew." She said it without bitterness, just the particular flatness of a fact that has been turned over enough times to lose its edges. The nephew had no experience with accounts, but had a great deal of experience being related to the right people. "Ah," Caleb said. "When the correspondence agency in Boston advertised Western placements," Clara continued, "I made inquiries. Douglas Hale's letter indicated he needed someone intelligent who could manage accounts. I believed that was a reasonable match for my qualifications." "Hale wanted someone to cook," Caleb said. "He didn't say it meanly. He said it the way a person states a correction plainly, because the truth is more useful than a comfortable lie." Clara turned to look at him. "I beg your pardon." "Hale's been through 3 arrangements in 5 years, Caleb said. He kept his eyes on the road. "Each time he writes to one of those agencies, he lists what he wants different. Last I heard, he wanted someone who could cook 3 meals a day and not ask him too many questions." He paused. "He's not a bad man. He's just not—" Another pause. "He's got a particular picture of what a ranch wife ought to be." "And I wasn't it," Clara said. "I expect not," Caleb said. Clara faced forward. The pines were thicker now, and the air was noticeably different, still warm but moving, carrying the smell of sap and dry grass and something faintly mineral from the rock formations, starting to appear on the upper slope to their right. "Were you expecting me to be upset about that?" she asked. Caleb thought about it. "I wasn't expecting anything," he said. "Ease." "Good," Clara said. "Because I am not upset about Douglas Hale's particular picture. I am annoyed that he wasted 4 months of correspondence and my entire travel budget without having the basic courtesy to communicate his reservations before I stepped on a train." She paused. "If a man isn't certain, he should say so early, not in a letter handed to me by a station agent in front of 30 people. "That's fair," Caleb said. "Thank you." They rode in silence for another 1/4 mile. Above them, a pair of crows cut across the sky and argued about something in the pines. "Mr. Whitaker," Clara said. "Caleb," he said. She considered that. "Caleb, I want to be direct with you about something." "All right," he said. "I am grateful for what you did on that platform. I am not sentimental about gratitude. I believe it's a debt that gets repaid through action, not through expressions of feeling. I intend to repay it by doing very good work on your accounts." She folded her hands in her lap. "But I want you to understand that I am not going to Millard Creek's definition of helpless. I am in a difficult situation. Those are different things." Caleb nodded once. "I know that," he said. "Do you—" "Yes," he said. "I watched you decide not to cry." Clara went very quiet for a moment. "Most people," she said finally, "would not have noticed that." "Most people weren't paying attention," Caleb said. The wagon rounded a bend in the road, and the trees parted, and Clara saw for the first time the land that rolled out below the north ridge wide and golden in the July light, a valley floor cut through by a line of darker green where a stream ran, and on a rise above it, a cluster of structures that were solid and well built, and had the look of something that had been meant to last. "Is that it?" she asked. "Silver Pine," Caleb said. His voice did something very small when he said it. Something that might have been pride, or might have been something more complicated than pride. "It's larger than I expected," Clara said. "It's a good piece of land," he said, then quieter almost to himself. It was anyway. Clara looked at him. He was watching the ranch below with an expression she couldn't quite read, something worn into it by more than just the sun. She said. He seemed to remember she was there. He straightened slightly. "You'll see the ledgers," he said. "You'll understand soon enough." Clara turned back to the valley. The stream caught the afternoon light, and the grass along its banks was the deep green of something that was still alive, still insisting on itself despite the heat. The ranch buildings were still in the way of places where serious work gets done rather than performed. She thought about 3 years of tangled accounts and a foreman's tally that wasn't the same as tracking, and about a man who'd lifted her suitcase off a warped board and told a crowd of laughing strangers that she deserved dignity. She thought there is something wrong here, not just the ledgers. She didn't say it. It was too early to say it. But she filed it in the place where she kept things she needed to return to later, and she sat straight on the wagon bench as Caleb Whitaker drove his horses down toward Silver Pine Ranch. He hadn't been wrong about the ledgers. Clara sat at the kitchen table 3 hours later with the south window open and the last of the afternoon light falling across 3 years of accounts, and she understood within the first 40 minutes that this was not merely a mess. A mess was disorganized. A mess had its origins in neglect or ignorance or simply too much work for one person to track. What she was looking at was something different. There were payments listed to vendors she'd never heard of for amounts that didn't correspond to any inventory or supply records. There were livestock sales recorded at prices below market value, significantly below in ways that couldn't be explained by drought or poor season, because she could see the county records Caleb had filed alongside the ledgers, and the season had been moderate. There were banknotes, 3 of them for increasing amounts at interest rates that started reasonable and climbed steeply, signed over the course of 2 years to the Territorial Land and Water Company. She'd never heard of the Territorial Land and Water Company. She pulled all 3 notes out and laid them side by side on the table and read them very carefully. Caleb was outside. She could hear him somewhere near the barn, a gate latching a horse, moving the low voice he seemed to use with animals, different from the voice he used with people. The cook, a weathered Tejano man named Santos, who'd apparently been with Silver Pine for 11 years, and spoke to Clara with a formal courtesy that she suspected was his way of reserving judgment, had left a tin of biscuits on the table and gone to his quarters without asking any questions. Clara appreciated that about Santos immediately. She spread the 3 banknotes on the table next to the ledgers and took out a piece of paper from her traveling bag and began to write figures. Caleb came in through the back door at about 7 o'clock. He stopped when he saw the papers spread across the entire surface of the kitchen table, and he stood for a moment looking at the organized chaos of it before he came over and hung his hat on the hook beside the door. "You need more light," he asked. "I need the lamp," Clara said. She didn't look up from her figures. "And I need you to answer some questions." He lit the lamp without comment and set it on the table to her left, where it would fall across the ledger she was working from. And then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down and folded his hands on the table, in the particular stillness of a man who knows he's about to hear something he isn't going to like and has decided to hear it anyway. "The Territorial Land and Water Company," Clara said. Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Harrison Vale's operation," he said. "Harrison Vale," Clara repeated. She wrote the name at the top of her paper. "And who is Harrison Vale?" "Biggest landowner in the county," Caleb said. "Runs cattle on the South Range. Has a stake in the bank." He paused. "Has an interest in the Northern Mountain Passage." Clara looked up for the first time. "The Northern Mountain Passage," she said. "It's the only route through the upper ridge that can support a cattle drive," Caleb said. "My land sits at the mouth of it." He said it flatly, the way he said most things, as if the facts ought to speak for themselves and didn't need any help from him. "Without that passage, the ranches up here can't move their herds to the railhead." "And the passage runs through Silver Pine Land," Clara said. "Through the northwestern corner," Caleb said. "My father settled it in 1861, filed the claim himself. The line goes straight through the passage mouth." Clara looked back down at the 3 banknotes. She set her finger on the first one, the oldest, dated August 1881. "This water rights agreement," she said. "Tell me about the water dispute." Caleb's jaw moved. "Vale claimed our draw on the upper creek was pulling water from his grazing land downstream. Said it was affecting his herd. Took it to the county land board." He looked at the table surface between them. "The board sided with him, partially. We had to cap the upper draw and redirect to the lower source." "And then you needed operating capital to restructure the irrigation," Clara said. "Yes. And the bank offered you a note." "At 6%, Caleb said. "First year," Clara pointed to the second note. "This is at 9%. The yield was down that year. And this one," she pointed to the third most recent note, 14%, and the collateral listed. She looked up at him directly. "The collateral listed is the northwestern land parcel." Caleb held very still. "You put the passage mouth up as collateral," Clara said. She didn't say it as an accusation. She said it the way she said most things, precisely because precision was more useful than anything else. "On a note at 14% interest with an 18-month term." She turned the paper so he could see her figures. "Caleb, at your current income and with these debt payments, you will be in default in 7 months. He looked at her figures for a long time. The lamp burned between them. Outside, the summer dark had come down over the mountain, and somewhere in the trees above the barn, an owl was asking its one question over and over. "I know," he said. "You know," Clara said. "I've known since spring," he said. "I just couldn't—" He stopped. He started again. "The foreman told me the numbers weren't good. I could see they weren't good. But I couldn't see the shape of it. The shape of it," Clara said slowly, "is that someone walked you into this." She turned the 3 notes back toward herself and looked at them for a long moment. "The water dispute came first, which forced the capital need, which created the debt, which is now secured against the land that controls the passage." She looked up. "Mr. Whitaker." "Caleb," he said. "Caleb." She held his eyes. "Harrison Vale doesn't want your water." He went very still. "He has never wanted your water," Clara said. "What he wants is the northwestern parcel, and someone has spent 3 years engineering a situation in which you will default on a note, and he will be able to claim that parcel legally through the bank." The owl outside asked its question again. Caleb pushed back from the table and stood up, and he walked to the window and stood there with his hands on the sill and his back to her, and for a long time he didn't say anything. Clara waited. She had learned that the men who went quiet when given hard news were often the ones worth waiting for. The ones who got loud immediately were usually just moving the air around. Finally, Caleb turned back from the window. His face had settled into something harder and quieter than it had been before. "You can see all that," he said, "in one afternoon." "I can see what the numbers tell me," Clara said. "The numbers have a story. They always do." He looked at her for a moment. Something moved in his expression that she couldn't quite name. Not gratitude, not exactly. More like the look of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and just realized there is someone standing close enough to help him with the weight. Not carrying it for him. Just close enough. "What do we do?" he said. Clara straightened the papers into a neat stack and set her pen down precisely parallel to its edge. "First," she said, "I'm going to read every document in this house that has anything to do with this land. The original claim filing, the survey notes, The county records. She looked at him steadily. Second, I'm going to find out exactly when Harrison Vale became interested in the Northern Passage and why he needs it enough to spend 3 years building a trap for a cattle operation that's never done him any harm. Caleb was still watching her. And third, he said. Third. Clara said, you're going to stop letting your foreman summarize your accounts for you and start sitting at this table and learning to read them yourself. A long silence. That's a lot of work, Caleb said. Yes, Clara said. It is. Starting when? Clara pushed her chair back, collected the papers into a careful order, and stood up. It already started, she said. I've been here 3 hours. Caleb Whitaker looked at Clara Bennett across the lamplit kitchen table, and for the first time since she'd stepped off the train in Millard Creek with her suitcase stuck in a warped board and 30 people laughing at someone else's letter, for the first time, she felt her shoulders come down out of her ears. Not because she was safe. She wasn't naive about that. She was 7 months from a default on a fraudulent debt scheme, in a territory where the biggest landowner had a stake in the bank that held the note, and the only person standing between Silver Pine Ranch and Harrison Vale's plan was a woman who'd arrived that morning with $11.40 and a cracked suitcase handle. She felt her shoulders drop because she was working, and Clara Bennett had always been most herself when she was working. I'll want access to any correspondence related to the water dispute, she said. Letters, notices, anything the county land board sent. It's all in the study, Caleb said. I'll show you in the morning. Good, she said. She picked up the lamp. Good night, Caleb. Good night, Miss Bennett, he said. She paused at the doorway. Clara, she said. If we're going to save your ranch, we might as well use each other's names. She carried the lamp down the hall and didn't look back. Behind her in the dark kitchen of Silver Pine Ranch, Caleb Whitaker stood very still for a long moment. Then he reached out and touched the edge of the table where her papers had been, and he thought about 3 years of a shape he couldn't see. And he thought about a woman who could read it in an afternoon. Outside, the owl asked its question one more time, and the summer dark settled over the mountain, and Silver Pine held itself against the heat, still standing, still breathing, still fighting in the quiet way that things fight when they have no choice but to keep going. She found the first real discrepancy at 4 in the morning. The rest of the house was asleep. Santos had banked the kitchen stove before he turned in, and the warmth of it still reached down the hall to the small study where Clara had carried the lamp and the 3 banknotes and a box of correspondence she'd pulled from the shelf Caleb had pointed to before he'd gone to bed. She'd told herself she would sleep. She'd told herself an hour, maybe 2, just enough to understand what she was working with before morning. That had been 6 hours ago. The letter was dated March 1882. It was written on the letterhead of the Territorial Land and Water Company, Harrison Vale's operation, and it was addressed not to Caleb Whitaker, but to the First Territorial Bank of Millard Creek. Clara held it closer to the lamp and read it a second time, then a third, turning each word over with the careful attention of someone who had spent 6 years in a law firm, learning that the most important part of any document was usually the part that looked the least important. The letter was about water rights. It was also very quietly about something else entirely. There was a clause buried in the 5th paragraph after 3 pages of dispute language and county code citations that referred to the Northwestern land parcel and its controlling position relative to the Upper Valley Transit Corridor. It didn't make a claim. It didn't ask for anything. It simply named the parcel, identified it, put it on record in writing in a document that had been filed with the bank at the exact same time the first note was being written. Clara set the letter down very carefully. Someone had known in March of 1882 that they would eventually want that parcel, and they had started building their paper trail before Caleb Whitaker even knew he was in a fight. She sat back in the chair and pressed her fingers together and thought for a long time about the difference between a man who made a mistake and a man who built a trap. When Caleb's boots sounded in the hall at 5:30, she had 3 columns of figures on her paper and 7 documents arranged in a line across the desk in chronological order. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at her, then at the desk, then at her again. "You slept," he said. It was not a question, but it wasn't an accusation either. It was the tone of a man who already knew the answer and was deciding how to feel about it. "I'll sleep when we know what we're dealing with," Clara said. "Sit down. There's something you need to see." He came in and sat in the other chair, the one pulled close to the desk, and she turned the March 1882 letter so it faced him and set her finger on the 5th paragraph. "Read this section," she said. He read it. She watched his face while he did. He was not a man who showed much, but she had been watching people's faces over documents for 6 years, and she could read the small things, the slight compression around the eyes, the way the jaw set a fraction tighter. He finished reading. He set the letter down. "He named the parcel," Caleb said, "before the note, before the collateral arrangement, before any of the debt structure that made the collateral arrangement possible." Clara kept her voice even. Harrison Vale knew in March of 1882 what he wanted from Silver Pine Ranch. Everything that happened after that, the water dispute ruling the banknotes, the interest escalation, all of it was designed to put you in a position where you would put that parcel up as collateral and then put you in a position where you couldn't pay the note. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's 3 years." "Nearly 3.5, Clara said. "He planned this for 3.5 years. "Someone did," Clara said. "Whether it was Vale himself or someone advising him is something we'll need to determine. But yes, this was planned." Caleb stood up. He walked to the window and stood there the way he'd stood in the kitchen the night before, and Clara waited again, watching the tension in his shoulders and the way he was holding himself like a man trying to keep something inside that very much wanted to come out. "I want to ride over to his property," Caleb said. "I want to look him in the eye and—" "No," Clara said. He turned. "Clara." "No," she said again, and her voice was not loud and it was not harsh, but it had a quality of absolute steadiness that stopped him the same way a wall stops water. "Caleb, listen to me. If you ride over there angry, you give him exactly what he wants. A confrontation that he can characterize to the county land board as aggression from you. He has money. He has relationships in that bank. He has been building this case for 3.5 years. She looked at him directly. "You have me. And what I'm telling you is that anger wins battles and evidence wins wars." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat back down. "All right," he said. "What do we do?" "We go to the Territorial Records Office in Copper Ridge," Clara said. "There will be an original survey of this land from your father's claim filing in 1861. If the northwestern parcel boundary is documented in that survey, if it shows the claim extending clearly through the passage mouth, then Vale's entire collateral arrangement is built on a title dispute that he manufactured, not a legitimate debt claim. You think the original survey will show it clearly? I think your father filed his claim properly in 1861, Clara said. I think a man who settled this land and built this operation understood exactly what he had and made sure he documented it." She paused. "I think Harrison Vale is counting on the fact that original survey documents are hard to find stored in a territorial office that nobody visits unless they have a specific reason to." Caleb looked at the desk and the line of documents she'd arranged. "You got all this from one night with the ledgers," he said. "And the correspondence file," she said. He shook his head slowly, not in disbelief, in something more like the bewildered acknowledgement of a man recalibrating his understanding of a situation. "When do we leave for Copper Ridge?" he said. "After breakfast," Clara said. "And you should sleep another hour first. You look terrible." He blinked. "I beg your pardon. You heard me," she said. "You can't think clearly when you're running on anger and no rest. 1 hour. I'll finish the correspondence review." He sat there for a moment looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite classify, and then he said, "Most people don't talk to me like that." "Most people," Clara said, turning back to the correspondence file, "aren't trying to save your ranch." He left the doorway. She heard his footsteps go back up the hall. She kept working. Yetote. Santos made eggs and cornbread at 6:30 and set them on the table without commentary, though Clara noticed he'd also put out a third cup and filled the coffee pot twice. When Caleb came back downstairs at 7, his face had some of the tight anger washed out of it and replaced with something more useful, the focused quiet of a man who has decided to trust a plan. They ate without much talk. Santos moved around the kitchen attending to things that probably didn't need attending to, and Clara understood that he was listening and that he had been on this ranch long enough to understand that what was being discussed at that table mattered. After the second cup of coffee, Santos said without turning from the stove, "The first note, at 6%. Clara and Caleb both looked at him. He turned around. He was a man in his late 50s, with the weathered stillness of someone who has seen a lot and decided which things were worth saying. "I was here when he signed it," Santos said. "The bank man who brought it out to the ranch. He came on a Saturday, said the county board ruling had come down on Friday, and the irrigation restructuring would need to start by the following month or face additional fines." Clara straightened. "He said the county board ruling had come down on Friday." "Yes, ma'am. The ruling that forced the irrigation change." "That's what he said." Clara looked at Caleb. "The county board meets on Wednesdays," she said. "I saw the meeting schedule in the correspondence." She set her coffee cup down. If the ruling came down on a Friday, it either came from an emergency session, which would be documented separately and would require a filing, or it didn't come from the county board at all. The kitchen was very quiet. "The bank man pressured you," Clara said to Caleb. "He said you needed the note immediately under a deadline, and the deadline was created by a ruling that may not have been legitimate." Caleb was looking at Santos. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Santos held his gaze without apology. "I told you the man made me uneasy," he said. "You told me the paperwork was in order." Caleb's jaw tightened. He looked at the table. "He's not blaming you," Clara said quietly. She looked at Caleb. "He's giving us another thread to pull." They left for Copper Ridge at 8:30, Caleb driving and Clara with the most essential documents folded carefully in her traveling bag. The road to Copper Ridge was 40 miles of climbing and dropping through mountain country. And on the way, Clara read through the last of the correspondence she hadn't finished before dawn, and twice she said, "Stop a moment," and Caleb pulled the horses up while she made a note on her paper. The second time he pulled up, he said, "You want to tell me what you just found?" "The water dispute went to the county land board in the fall of 1881, she said, but Harrison Vale filed his initial objection in the spring of 1881. She looked at him. 6 months before the hearing. That's not unusual for a property dispute. What's unusual is that he filed it through a county commissioner named Albright, not through the land board directly." "Albright," Caleb said. "You know that name. He's on the bank's lending committee," Caleb said. He said it slowly, like he was reading something written in a language he'd almost forgotten. "He's been on it for years." Clara wrote the name down. "Commissioner Albright," she said, "helped file the water objection that created the pressure that led to the note, and sits on the lending committee of the bank that issued the note with the collateral arrangement." She looked up from her paper. "Caleb, this isn't one man. This is a structure." He drove for a minute without saying anything. "How do we prove that?" he said. "The same way you prove anything," Clara said. "Carefully, in the right order." The Territorial Records Office in Copper Ridge was staffed by a young man named Foster, who had the bewildered expression of someone who had expected this job to require less actual work. He looked at Clara's request, and then at Caleb's, and then back at the request, and he said, "The 1861 land filings are in the archive room. Nobody's been in there since—" He tried to think of when. "Since a while. Then we'll be in there for a while," Clara said pleasantly, and Foster decided not to argue with her. The archive room was not organized in any system that Clara could identify in the first 10 minutes, but in the next 30, she found its internal logic by year, then by claim type, then by claimant initial, and from there, It took her another 40 minutes to find the original Whitaker claim filing from September 1861. It was a heavy document, hand-drawn survey, attached ink faded to a warm brown. She carried it to the reading table and spread the survey carefully and found the northwestern parcel boundary, and she looked at it for a long time. Caleb was standing beside her. She could feel him looking at it too. "There," she said. Her finger traced the line. "The claim boundary runs through here and here, and—" She moved her finger to the upper corner, through this point, which is the passage mouth. "That's clearly on our land," Caleb said. His voice was tight. "It's on your land," Clara said. Unambiguously. The survey was done by territorial surveyor Elias Marks, and the signature is witnessed and dated. She looked at him. "This document proves that your father's claim included the passage mouth, that the boundary was properly surveyed and witnessed in 1861, and that any subsequent document claiming otherwise has no legitimate basis." Caleb reached out and touched the edge of the survey. He didn't say anything for a moment. "My father filed this," he said quietly. "He did," Clara said. She gave him a moment because some things needed a moment. Then she said, "I need the clerk to make us a certified copy. Certified copies have legal standing that originals kept in a private home. Don't it establishes the document in the public record in a way that makes it much harder to challenge?" She looked at him. "And I need to see one more thing while we're here." "What?" "The water dispute filing," she said. "The original one that Albright submitted on Vale's behalf in the spring of 1881. The filing was in the 1881 section, and when Clara found it and read the first page, she made a sound that wasn't quite a word, something between a breath and a conclusion. "What is it?" Caleb said. She turned the document so he could see the signature block at the bottom. "The filing is signed by Commissioner Albright," she said. "But the party on whose behalf he filed is not listed as Harrison Vale." Caleb looked at the signature block. "The Territorial Land and Water Company," he said. "A company," Clara said, "that did not exist as a registered entity until she turned back one page to the filing date, 3 weeks after this submission." The room was very quiet. "He filed a county objection," Caleb said slowly, "on behalf of a company that didn't exist yet, which means the objection itself was filed fraudulently," Clara said. "Which means the ruling based on it was invalid. Which means the pressure to take the first note was created by an invalid process." She looked at him. "Caleb, the entire chain, every link of it goes back to this one fraudulent filing." He straightened. He looked at her. And for the first time since she'd known him since yesterday morning on a train platform in Millard Creek, which felt like considerably longer ago than that, the tightness in his face broke open into something clean. "We can take this to a circuit judge," he said. "We can take it to a federal land commissioner if we need to," Clara said. "But yes, a circuit judge first." She began carefully refolding the documents. "I need certified copies of both of these, and the water dispute ruling, and the original note documents, which I already have." She turned to find Caleb looking at her with an expression she still couldn't fully name. It was the same look he'd had in the kitchen, the one she'd classified as something between recognition and something more complicated. But it was clearer now, less guarded. "Clara," he said. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "We've found the evidence. We haven't used it." "I wasn't going to thank you," he said. She looked at him. "I was going to say—" He stopped. He looked at the document in her hands and then back at her face. "I was going to say I'm sorry." She didn't expect that. She was good at expecting things, and she hadn't expected that. "For what?" she said carefully. "For what happened to you on that platform," he said. "Not what Hale did. I can't be sorry for something someone else chose to do. But—" He paused in the way he paused when he was choosing words with the same care he'd used choosing a route through rough terrain. "You came 1,500 miles under a promise, and the first thing this territory showed you was a crowd of people deciding you were worth laughing at." His voice was steady, but something underneath it wasn't. That's not what this country is supposed to be. Clara held the documents against her chest and looked at Caleb Whitaker in the dusty archive room of the Copper Ridge Territorial Records Office, and she thought about how long it had been since a man had apologized to her for something he hadn't done on behalf of a world that should have behaved better. "It's not what any country is supposed to be," she said. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." They stood there for a moment in the particular quiet of two people who have just said something true to each other. Then Clara said, "I'll speak to the clerk about the certified copies." And she turned and walked toward the door, and her posture was straight, and her steps were measured, and only someone paying very close attention would have noticed that her eyes were brighter than they'd been 30 seconds before. Caleb noticed. He didn't say anything. He picked up the water dispute filing and followed her out. Foster, the records clerk, made the certified copies with the doleful efficiency of someone who had been asked to do something he considered unnecessary and had decided to do it correctly anyway. While he worked, Clara sat in the front room of the records office and wrote out a summary of what they'd found the fraudulent company filing the Albright connection. The banknote chain, the survey evidence organized in the order she would present it if she were standing before a circuit judge. Caleb sat across from her. He watched her write. He didn't watch her the way people watched someone working with the glancing inattention of someone waiting for a task to finish. He watched her the way he had watched the ranch from the wagon road, with specific attention. After a while he said, "How did you learn to do this?" It wasn't quite a question. Clara kept writing. "The law firm," she said. 6 years of other people's cases. You learn to see the structure of things. You learn that most dishonesty is lazy. It cuts corners, assumes it won't be examined closely, relies on the other person not knowing what to look for. She paused, turned a page. The people who deceived your ranch operation were not lazy, but they were arrogant. They didn't think anyone would look closely. "Because they looked at me," Caleb said, "and figured I wasn't the kind of man who would." Clara looked up from her writing. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly right." "And they were right," Caleb said. His voice was even, not self-pitying, just accurate. "I should have looked." "You're looking now," Clara said. "You're making me look. I'm showing you what I see," she said. "It's not the same thing as making you do anything." She returned to her writing. "You lifted a suitcase off a warped board and told 30 people in a public square that a woman deserved dignity. That was not nothing, Caleb. That was a choice. Nobody made you make it." He was quiet for long enough that she finished the page she was writing. Then he said, "Nobody's talked to me like you do." "Like what?" she said. "Like I'm like what I think matters," he said. "Most people out here either think I'm useful or they think I'm in the way. My foreman tells me what I want to hear." Santos. A slight softening when he said Santos's name. "Santos tells me the truth, but not always all of it." He looked at his hands. "You just tell me what is." "That's what you hired me to do," Clara said. "I didn't exactly hire you," he said. "I asked you if you wanted work. And I set terms," she said. "Which you accepted. That's a hiring." He looked at her. That thing happened at the corner of his mouth again, not quite a smile, but close enough to count. "Fair enough," he said. Foster returned with the certified copies, stamped and signed, and Clara checked each one against the originals before she tucked them into her traveling bag with the care of someone handling things that might need to be trusted with someone's entire future. Outside, the afternoon had gone warm and bright in the way of mountain afternoons in July. And Caleb untied the horses, and Clara stood beside the wagon, thinking about the 2-hour drive back to Silver Pine and the evening ahead, and the conversation she was going to need to have with Caleb before any of it could go further. "There's something else," she said. He looked at her over the horses' backs. "I thought there might be," he said. "When we get back, when we take this to a circuit judge, it's going to become known that we've been to the records office," she said. "Copper Ridge is not a large town. People talk. And when it becomes known, Harrison Vale will find out. And when Vale finds out, he will understand that the evidence exists and that someone has organized it." Caleb nodded slowly. "He may move up his timeline," Clara said. The default on the note isn't due for 7 months, but he doesn't need the default if he can find another way to put pressure on the parcel. He has a county commissioner. He has relationships in the bank. She met Caleb's eyes. He may come at us in ways we're not expecting yet. Us, Caleb said. Clara heard herself say it. She held Caleb's gaze and didn't look away. Yes, she said. Us. He held the horses still for a moment. Then we move fast, he said. We move carefully, she said. But yes, quickly. She climbed up to the wagon bench without waiting for assistance, arranged her traveling bag across her lap, and looked straight at the road ahead. Caleb came around and climbed up beside her, and he set the horses moving, and they headed back toward the mountain road, with the certified documents tucked against Clara's ribs, and the weight of everything they now knew pressing down on them both like the particular pressure of a summer sky before a storm. Neither of them spoke for almost a mile. Then Caleb said, "My father built that ranch himself, start to finish. He logged the timber, he laid the foundation, he ran the first cattle drive. He filed that claim in 1861 because he believed this land was worth believing in." He drove for another moment. He died in 1879, 2 years before Vail started building his trap. Clara looked at the road. He never knew, Caleb said. Never knew someone would spend 3 years trying to take what he built. No, Clara said. But he filed the survey, Caleb said. He documented everything correct and proper because he believed the record ought to tell the truth. He paused. Like he knew someone would need it someday. Clara thought about a man in 1861 in a surveyor's office signing his name to a document that would sit in an archive room for 23 years until his son's accountant found it on a Thursday afternoon. She thought about the particular faith of that act, the belief that honesty put into a record would still be honest when it was needed. He was right, she said. Caleb drove. The mountain road climbed ahead of them, and the sun was moving toward the western ridge, and Silver Pine was waiting somewhere above them in the timber, and when they got there, Clara knew the real work would begin. But they had the survey. They had the fraudulent filing. They had the chain of evidence that connected Albright to Vail, to the bank, to the notes, to the collateral, to the plan. And they had 7 months, or possibly less, if Vail moved quickly to use it. She settled the traveling bag more firmly in her lap and watched the road and thought about what came next. And beside her, Caleb Whitaker drove his horses home through the summer afternoon with the steadiness of a man who has remembered what he is fighting for. Behind them in Copper Ridge, Foster the records clerk filed his logbook entry for the day. In the box marked Requesting Party, he wrote 2 names side by side. He didn't think much about it, but it was on the record, and on the record was exactly where it needed to be. They were back at Silver Pine by evening, and Santos had supper on the table without being asked, which told Clara that Santos understood something significant had happened, even without being told what. He set down a plate of beans and salt pork and cornbread and poured coffee without ceremony. And when Caleb said, "We found the survey," Santos put the coffee pot down slowly and turned around. "Your father's survey," Santos said. "The original," Clara said. "Certified copy in my bag. The boundary runs through the passage mouth clear and witnessed." Santos looked at Caleb for a long moment. Something moved in the older man's face that Clara recognized from the way people looked when they'd been carrying worry so long they'd forgotten what it felt like not to. "Good," he said finally. Just that one word. Then he picked up the coffee pot and went back to the stove. Clara ate quickly. She had questions that couldn't wait for morning and a mind that wouldn't slow down enough to sleep until she'd answered them. She pulled out the certified copies after supper and spread them on the kitchen table alongside the notes she'd made in the records office, and she started tracing the corporate registration of the Territorial Land and Water Company in the documents she had available. Caleb sat across from her and didn't pretend to do anything else. He just watched and drank his coffee and waited. 30 minutes and Santos came back. He stood in the kitchen doorway with his hat in his hands, and he said, "There's something I should have told you sooner." Both of them looked up. Santos turned his hat by the brim. "Last spring, March or April. A man came out to the northern fence line, not on our land, just outside it on the trail. He said he was doing a survey for the county, measuring distances. He had instruments. He paused. I told him the county had already surveyed this land. He said this was a new assessment. I told Caleb there'd been a man on the fence line. You told me a surveyor had come through, Caleb said slowly. I did, Santos said. You said it was probably routine. Because I thought it was, Caleb said. He set his coffee cup down. A new assessment. Clara looked up from her documents. Santos, she said carefully. Did this man have any identification, any paperwork with him? He showed me a paper, Santos said. County letterhead, Commissioner's office. Albright, Clara said. Santos held her eyes. I didn't read the name carefully, but it was the Commissioner's office letterhead, she said. Not the territorial surveyor, not the land board. Yes, Santos said. I think that's right. Clara turned to Caleb. Someone sent a man to resurvey your fence line last spring, she said. Not a territorial surveyor. Not the land board. Someone operating under the commissioner's authority. She tapped the fraudulent company filing on the table. They weren't just planning to claim the parcel through the banknote. They were preparing a secondary argument. If the note foreclosure failed, if someone challenged the process, they would have a new survey on record showing the boundary differently. The kitchen was completely silent. He was measuring for a false survey, Caleb said. He was preparing one, Clara said. Whether they ever filed it depends on whether they felt they needed to, but the groundwork is there. She looked at both of them. They have two paths to that parcel, the note foreclosure and a boundary dispute supported by a commissioner-ordered resurvey. Caleb pushed back from the table and stood up. He walked to the back door and pushed it open and stood there with one hand on the frame, and Clara heard him breathing slow and controlled the way a man breathes when he is making a decision about what kind of man he's going to be in the next 5 minutes. Caleb, she said. I'm not going anywhere, he said. I'm just... He stopped. Give me a minute. She gave him the minute. When he came back to the table, his face had settled into something she was beginning to recognize as his working expression, the anger converted into something harder and more useful, banked down into fuel rather than fire. The circuit judge, he said. When does he come through? The circuit court sits in Millard Creek in 6 weeks, Clara said. Judge Harlan Morris. I saw the schedule in the county notices in the correspondence file. 6 weeks, Caleb said. Can we build a case in 6 weeks? We have the material, Clara said. What we need is to organize it properly and find one more thing. She paused. We need someone who can testify, not just documents. A person who knows how this arrangement was structured and can speak to it under oath. Caleb looked at her. You think there's someone like that? There's always someone, Clara said. A structure like this doesn't build itself without people who implement it. The bankman who brought the note to Santos on a Saturday and said the county ruling had come down on a Friday, that man knew the timeline was false. He may not have understood the full scope, but he knew the deadline he was pushing wasn't real. She folded her hands on the table. People who are used to do pieces of someone else's plan often don't realize until later what the whole plan was. And sometimes, when they understand it, they don't like what they were used for. You want to find the bankman? Caleb said. I want to find the bankman, Clara confirmed. Santos, who had been standing silently in the doorway through all of this, said quietly, His name was Perch. Gerald Perch. He's still at the First Territorial. I've seen him at the feed store. Clara looked at Santos. You've been paying attention, she said. I've been on this ranch for 11 years, Santos said simply. I pay attention to everything. 3 days passed. They were the kind of days that looked quiet from the outside, and were anything but. Clara spent the mornings at the kitchen table building the formal document structure for the circuit court presentation. She worked methodically, the fraudulent filing. First, the Albright connection, second, the note chain, third, the survey evidence, fourth. Because she understood that a judge needed a story told in the right order, the same way a jury needed to feel the logic of a thing before they trusted the evidence of it. Caleb spent the mornings with his cattle and his foreman, and the daily operation of a ranch that still had to function regardless of what was happening in its ledgers. But in the afternoons, he came back to the kitchen table, and Clara showed him what she'd organized, and she asked him questions about the timeline, about conversations he remembered, about the specific language the bank man had used on that Saturday when Santos had been uneasy. He answered everything. He didn't embellish and he didn't minimize. He simply remembered with the precise accuracy of a man who didn't speak often, but paid attention to everything said around him, and Clara wrote it down. On the second day, Santos came back from town with the information that Gerald Perch had been asking around about who had been to the Territorial Records office in Copper Ridge last Thursday. They looked at each other across the kitchen table. "That was fast," Caleb said. "Vale has eyes in Copper Ridge," Clara said. "Or Albright does." She set her pen down. "They know we went to the records office. They may not know what we found, but they know we were looking." "Does that change our timeline?" "It compresses it," Clara said. "We can't wait 6 weeks for the circuit court." Caleb went still. "Then what do we do?" "We find Gerald Perch before Vale finds out we have the survey," Clara said. "And we have that conversation." She went to find Perch herself. Caleb drove her to town. He didn't offer to come in because she'd made it clear this was a conversation that would go better without him, and he waited outside the feed store with the horses, while Clara walked into the First Territorial Bank of Millard Creek for the first time. Gerald Perch was a man of about 50, with the rounded shoulders of someone who had spent 30 years bending over a desk, and the careful eyes of someone who had spent 30 years in other people's business. He was behind the teller window, and he looked at Clara when she came in with the particular professional attention of someone cataloging a customer, and then she saw the moment he recognized her. His face went careful. "Miss Bennett," he said. "Mr. Perch," she said. She set her hands flat on the teller counter. She didn't smile. "I'd like to speak with you privately. It won't take long." "I'm working," he said. "I know," she said. "What I have to say will either take 5 minutes of your time now or considerably more of your time in a circuit court proceeding in the next several weeks." She held his eyes. 5 minutes now seems more efficient." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something to his colleague beside him, and came around the counter and led her to a small room behind the main office. He closed the door. He stood against it. "I know who you are," he said immediately. "You're staying at Whitaker's ranch." "I'm working at Whitaker's ranch," Clara said. "There is a difference." She pulled the notes she'd written, not the certified documents, those were safe at Silver Pine, but her own summary of the evidence chain, and set them on the small table between them. "On the Saturday in August of 1881, you drove out to Silver Pine Ranch and presented Caleb Whitaker with a note for operating capital. You told the ranch's cook that the county land board ruling had come down the day before." Perch looked at the table. "The county land board meets on Wednesdays," Clara said. "Not Fridays. I've checked the meeting schedule. If the ruling had come down on a Friday, it would have been from an emergency session. There's no emergency session on record." She waited. "You told a man his deadline was created by a ruling that either didn't exist yet or wasn't what you represented it to be." "I was given information," Perch said stiffly. "I passed it along." "Who gave you the information?" Silence. "Mr. Perch," Clara said quietly. "I have the original survey from 1861 documenting the Whitaker claim boundary. I have the fraudulent company filing from the spring of 1881, filed under a company name that wasn't registered until 3 weeks after the filing date. I have Commissioner Albright's name on that filing. I have the note chain from your bank with the escalating interest and the collateral arrangement on the passage parcel." She paused. "What I don't have yet is testimony about who instructed you to push that deadline on that Saturday." Perch's hands, she noticed, were very still, the stillness of a man trying not to show movement. "If I were involved in something I didn't fully understand the scope of," Clara said, "and if I discovered what the full scope was, and if I had an opportunity to make my position clear before a circuit court proceeding rather than during one. She let the space speak for a moment. I believe a judge would consider that relevant. Perch looked at the table for a long moment. Then he looked at her. Albright called me, he said. He said the ruling had been filed and the pressure application needed to happen immediately. He said Vail needed the note signed before Whitaker had time to seek other counsel. He stopped. I thought it was a standard competitive land arrangement, one rancher outmaneuvering another. I didn't. He pressed his lips together. I didn't know about the survey. I didn't know about the company filing date. But you knew the deadline you represented wasn't from a land board ruling, Clara said. A long pause. I knew the timing was accelerated, Perch said. Will you say that to a circuit judge? The longest pause yet. What happens to me if I do? He said. I'm not a lawyer, Clara said. I can't promise you anything. But I can tell you that what happens to a man who comes forward before proceedings begin is generally different from what happens to a man who comes forward because he's subpoenaed. She picked up her papers. I'll be at Silver Pine Ranch for the foreseeable future. If you decide you want to speak with us further, Santos can find you. She walked out of the small room through the main bank and out the front door into the July heat, and she got up onto the wagon bench beside Caleb with her papers in her traveling bag and her pulse beating slightly faster than she would have preferred. Well, Caleb said. He was used, Clara said. He didn't understand the full scope. He knew something was off about the deadline, but he followed instructions because Albright has authority over the bank's lending relationships, and Perch knew which side his income came from. She looked at the road ahead. He's scared. Will he talk? I think so, Clara said. I gave him a reason to think about what talking early looks like versus talking late. She paused. Drive. I need to think. He drove. Dear. The letter arrived 4 days later. Santos brought it in from the gatepost at midday, a sealed envelope with no sender marked on the outside, just Caleb Whitaker's name in handwriting that was neat and deliberate and cold. Caleb opened it at the kitchen table with Clara beside him. The letter was from Harrison Vail. It was 4 sentences. Mr. Whitaker, I understand you have been making inquiries in Copper Ridge. I would encourage you to consider the costs of pursuing matters that are settled in law and recorded in the bank's instruments. Your current position is precarious. It would be a shame for that precariousness to become permanent before its natural resolution. H. Vail. Caleb read it twice. He set it down. He knows, he said. He knows we went to the records office, Clara said. He doesn't say what we found. He's fishing. She picked up the letter and read it again, carefully word by word. He says matters settled in law. He's referring to the note. He's not mentioning the survey because he doesn't know if we found it or what we did with it. She set the letter down. This is a warning. He wants you to back down before this gets further. He's not going to get that, Caleb said. No, Clara said. He isn't. She stood up. But we need to move now. If Vail knows we've been to Copper Ridge, he'll start shoring up his position. Albright may become harder to reach. Perch may become frightened into silence. She looked at Caleb directly. We can't wait for the circuit court. We need to send what we have to the Federal Land Commissioner's office in Prescott. Now, today. Caleb looked at her. A Federal Land Commissioner outranks the circuit court. In land title disputes involving fraudulent government filings, yes, Clara said. If we file a formal complaint with evidence to the federal office before Vail has time to build a counter-narrative with Albright, we create a federal record. That's much harder to bury than a local court proceeding. You know how to file that. I know how the law firm I worked for would have filed it, she said, which is as close to knowing as I can get without a law degree. She paused. We should also send a copy to the territorial governor's office. Caleb was quiet for a moment. You want to make this so visible that Vail can't make it disappear? Yes, Clara said. Exactly that. All right, he said. He stood up. What do you need? Paper, Clara said. Ink, 3 hours. And Santos to ride to Copper Ridge with the letters today, not tomorrow. Caleb went to the study for the paper. When he came back, he paused in the kitchen doorway and looked at her where she was already organizing documents on the table. Clara, he said. She looked up. He opened his mouth. Something moved in his face that wasn't the working expression, and wasn't the anger, and wasn't the particular steadiness he wore like weather gear. Something that was quieter than all of those things. More uncertain. What you said in the records office, he said. About what I did on the platform. About it being a choice. She waited. Nobody's told me that in a long time, he said. That a choice I made mattered. Clara held his eyes. She thought about what to say and decided to say the true thing. You made the right choice, she said. At some cost to yourself in a town where people will form opinions. That's not a small thing, Caleb. He looked at her for another moment. My wife would have liked you, he said. Then he seemed to register what he'd said because something shifted, not alarm, but the particular expression of someone who has said a thing out loud that has mostly lived inside until now. She died, 4 years ago, fever in the winter. Clara was still. I'm sorry, she said. And she meant it precisely without embellishment, the way she said things she meant. I've been running this ranch by myself since then, he said, trying to keep it what she and I built together. Trying to keep it what my father built. He looked at the papers on the table. I thought if I worked hard enough. You couldn't work your way out of a trap, Clara said gently. That's not a failure of effort. That's a failure of someone else's integrity. He looked at her. Your wife, Clara said. What was her name? Margaret, he said. Margaret would have looked at these documents, Clara said, and she would have been furious on your behalf. She held his gaze. So am I. Something in Caleb's expression broke open and reset itself in the space of about 2 seconds. She watched it happen. She didn't look away because she understood that sometimes the kindest thing you could do for a person was to let them be seen. Then he put the paper on the table in front of her and said, 3 hours, you said. Starting now, she said, and she picked up her pen. Santos rode to Copper Ridge with the letters that evening, with instructions to post them at the territorial mail office to both Prescott and the governor in Tucson, and to do it before any other business, and tell no one what he carried. He came back at midnight and knocked on Clara's door. She was still awake, she was always still awake, and said through the door, It's done. Thank you, Santos, she said. There was a man watching the road out of Silver Pine, he said, on horseback, about a mile north of town. He moved off when I came back. Clara opened the door. Santos stood in the hallway with his hat in his hand and his face telling her what she already understood. Vale's watching the ranch, she said. Yes, ma'am, Santos said. She thought about the letter's 4 cold sentences, about the phrase precarious position and natural resolution, about a man who had spent 3.5 years building an invisible trap and was now watching it being dismantled from outside his own fence line. A man like that didn't just watch. Wake Caleb, she said. Santos's expression shifted. Now, she said. Please. She went back to the desk and picked up the one document she hadn't sent copies of the summary she'd written herself, the one laying out every connection in plain language, the narrative version of the evidence rather than the legal version. She had kept it because she thought she might need it for the circuit court presentation. She looked at it now and thought, this is the thing Vale would most want to find. Because this was the document that told the story in terms that any person not just a judge could understand. This was the document that could walk into a room and speak to 30 people on a depot platform and make them understand what had been done and who had done it. Caleb appeared in the hallway, boots on, jacket unbuttoned. He looked at her face and came fully awake in the way people came awake when they had learned that emergency and calm could occupy the same expression. What is it? Someone was watching the road, Clara said. Santos saw him on the way back. Man on horseback north of town. Caleb was quiet for one moment. Then, "He's moving faster than we thought." "Yes," Clara said. "And we need to think about what that means for the ranch. Not just the legal case, the physical operation." She looked at him. "Who on your range crew can be trusted without question?" "Two men," he said immediately. "Hector and Ames. Put them on the northern fence line at night," she said. "Rotating. Don't tell the others why, just say it's a precaution for summer grazing." She paused. "And the cattle on the northern pasture, can they be moved to the south range temporarily?" he thought. "It'll crowd the south pasture." "I know," she said. "But if Vale is escalating, the most direct pressure he can apply before any federal response arrives is physical. Fence lines, water access, cattle." She looked at him steadily. "The letters are sent. Perch may or may not come forward. We have 6 weeks until the circuit court, and potentially months before Prescott responds. In the meantime, you still have a ranch to protect." "You think he'd go after the cattle," Caleb said. "I think a man who built a 3.5-year trap does not stop because someone started asking questions at a records office," Clara said. "I think he escalates, and I think we need to be ready for that." Caleb nodded. He buttoned his jacket. "I'll talk to Hector and Ames tonight." "Good," Clara said. He turned to go, stopped, turned back. "Clara," he said, "why are you still awake at midnight?" She looked at him, then down at the papers on her desk, then back at him. "Because this is mine now too," she said. "This fight, this ranch." She said it matter-of-factly, the way she said things she'd already decided. "I arrived in this territory 3 weeks ago, under a promise that turned out to be nothing. But this," she set her hand flat on the papers. "This is something real. This is worth fighting for." Caleb stood in the doorway and looked at her for a long moment, and she couldn't read his expression fully in the low lamplight, but she didn't need to read all of it. She could read enough. "Get some sleep," he said. "A little anyway." "After you talk to Hector and Ames," she said. He almost smiled. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Caleb," she said. He went down the hall. She heard the back door, his boots on the ground outside, his voice low in the direction of the bunkhouse. She turned back to the desk. She picked up the narrative summary, the document that told the whole story in plain language, and she read it through from the beginning. All of it. Every connection, every date, every name. Then she pulled a clean sheet of paper and made a second copy. Careful and exact. She put the original in her traveling bag. She put the second copy in the space behind the loose stone in the study fireplace that she'd noticed on her second day at Silver Pine, and had said nothing about until now, because some information was better kept in reserve. Then she turned down the lamp and went to her room, and she lay on the bed with her hands folded on her chest and her eyes open in the dark, and she thought about a man on horseback watching the road north of Millard Creek, and she thought about a woman who had arrived with $11.40 and a cracked suitcase handle and no plan. She had a plan now. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep for a long time, but when she finally did, it was the sleep of someone who has made their decisions and means to stand by them. Outside, somewhere on the northern fence line, Hector's lantern moved slow and steady through the summer dark. Silver Pine was still standing, and they intended to keep it that way. The fence was cut on a Tuesday night. Hector found it at first light. Wednesday, 3 posts pulled clean, and 40 feet of wire, down on the northwest corner of the upper pasture, the section closest to the passage mouth. 6 cattle had drifted through the gap in the dark. They were grazing on the wrong side of the line when Hector rode up, and he spent an hour moving them back before he came to the house. Clara was already at the kitchen table when he knocked. She heard his voice and Caleb's at the back door, and she was on her feet before Caleb came in to tell her. She read his face in the doorway. "The fence," she said. "Northwest corner," he said. "Posts pulled, not broken. Somebody did it on purpose and took their time about it." Clara set her pen down precisely. "Any cattle lost?" "No. 6 strayed." Hector got them back. Any damage to the passage area itself? Not that we can see, Caleb said. Yet. She heard that word and understood what it cost him to say it with that kind of control. She stood up and went to the window and turned back to face him. This is what escalation looks like, she said. He's not going to court yet. He's going to make running this ranch difficult enough that you consider settling. He'll be waiting a long time for that, Caleb said. He knows that now, Clara said. Which means the fence is the beginning, not the end. She looked at him steadily. We need to accelerate our timeline. The circuit court is 5 weeks out. We can't wait 5 weeks. You said the federal response from Prescott could take months. It could, she said. But there's another option. She pulled the chair out and sat back down. Judge Morris, the circuit judge. He comes through Millard Creek in 5 weeks for the regular session, but circuit judges can hear emergency motions outside the regular calendar if the matter involves imminent loss of property. An emergency injunction. She looked at Caleb. If we can demonstrate that Vail is actively interfering with your operations, while a fraudulent debt instrument is being used against your land, we can petition for an emergency hearing. Caleb was quiet for the moment. Can you write that petition? I can write it, Clara said. Whether a judge will grant it depends on how well the evidence holds together and how quickly we can get it in front of him. She paused. We need Perch. Caleb looked at her. Perch said he'd think about it, she said. It's been 5 days. Someone cut your fence last night. We don't have the luxury of waiting for him to finish thinking. Caleb picked up his hat from the hook. I'll go see him. No, Clara said. I'll go. You need to be here repairing that fence in plain view. If Hector found that gap, others will know about it by noon. How you respond to it matters. She held his eyes. Fix the fence. Be visible. Let the town see that Silver Pine is standing. He looked at her for a moment. That thing happened in his expression, the thing she'd stopped trying to classify and had started simply accepting as a particular form of trust she hadn't known she was looking for. All right, he said. Send Ames with me to town, she said. I don't want to make the trip alone. He didn't argue with that either, which told her he understood exactly what they were dealing with. Gerald Perch was not at the bank when Clara arrived. The teller at the window told her Mr. Perch was out on business and wouldn't be back until afternoon. The teller said it with the careful blankness of someone who had been told what to say, and Clara recognized the specific quality of that blankness from 6 years of watching people deliver scripted information in a law firm. She went to the feed store and asked Ames to wait with the horses and walked in and bought a box of salt as a reason to be there. And while the store owner made change, she said conversationally, I understand Gerald Perch lives above the telegraph office. Is that right? The store owner looked at her with the evaluating caution of a man who had heard things about the woman staying at Silver Pine and hadn't yet decided what he thought. That's right, he said. Thank you, Clara said, and took her salt and left. She found Perch at his rooming house not above the telegraph office. The store owner had been testing her, giving her the wrong address to see what she'd do with it. That told her something about how much people in Millard Creek were paying attention to her movements. She found the right address through the woman at the dry goods counter, who seemed to have no investment in protecting Gerald Perch's privacy, and she knocked on his door at 10:30. He answered in his shirt sleeves. He looked at her and looked past her at the empty hallway and let her in. Someone cut Whitaker's fence last night, Clara said before she'd even sat down. Northwest corner, the passage parcel. Perch sat on the edge of his bed. He put his hands on his knees. Vail's moving, Clara said. Not in court yet. He's trying to pressure Caleb into a settlement first. But when pressure doesn't work, he'll move to the note foreclosure, and when he does, he'll have Albright's resurvey ready to challenge the boundary. She sat in the room's single chair and looked at Perch directly. I'm filing an emergency injunction petition with Judge Morris. I need a sworn statement from you about the Saturday you delivered the note to Silver Pine. The false deadline. Albright's instruction to move immediately. Perch looked at his hands. If I give that statement, he said, I lose my position at the bank. If you don't, Clara said, and this comes to a full proceeding, you'll be called anyway, and at that point you'll be explaining why you waited, which is a harder position than explaining why you came forward." She paused. "Mr. Perch, you delivered a note under a false deadline to a man who was trying to keep his father's land. You may not have understood the full picture, but you understand it now. What you do with that understanding is the choice that defines what kind of man you are." Perch was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Albright told me Vale needed the note executed before Whitaker talked to anyone in Copper Ridge. He said it specifically. Not before the land board ruled, before Whitaker talked to anyone in Copper Ridge." He looked up. "I didn't know what that meant at the time. I thought it was just competitive business." "It means they were afraid of what he'd find in the records office," Clara said. "They knew the survey existed. They needed the note executed and the collateral on record before anyone thought to look at the original filing." She held his eyes. "That's not competitive business. That's fraud. And you were the mechanism of it." Perch flinched. "Not because you intended it," she said more quietly, "but because Albright used you the same way he used the county process and the bank instruments. The difference between you and them is that you didn't know. You still have a choice they don't have anymore." He stood up. He went to the small table in the corner and stood there with his back to her for 30 seconds. Then he turned around. "I'll give you the statement," he said. "In writing. Signed." Clara reached into her traveling bag and produced paper and pen. Perch looked at them and almost laughed a small, exhausted sound. "You came prepared," he said. "I usually do," Clara said, and held out the pen. She was back at Silver Pine by early afternoon with Perch's signed statement in her bag and the petition draft half written in her head. Caleb was at the northwest fence line with Hector and Ames, and she could see from the kitchen window that all 3 posts were back in the ground and the wire was being restrung. She watched for a moment the way Caleb worked without hurry, but without pause. The particular efficiency of a man who had been doing physical work his whole life and saw no point in making it dramatic. And then she went to the study and sat down and wrote the petition in one sustained effort that took 2.5 hours. Santos brought her coffee twice. He didn't say anything either time. He just set it down where she could reach it and left, and she drank it without looking up from the page. When Caleb came in at 4 o'clock, smelling of dust and summer heat, she had the petition finished. Perch's statement organized as the primary exhibit and the certified copies arranged in the order the judge would need them. "Perch gave the statement," she said before he could ask. Caleb stopped. He looked at the papers. "He did it?" "In writing signed describing Albright's specific instruction to execute the note before you could speak to anyone in Copper Ridge." She turned the statement so he could read it. "This is what we needed. This connects the commissioner to Vale's timeline in a way the documents alone couldn't prove." Caleb read it standing up. He read it twice. Then he set it down and looked at Clara with an expression that had gone somewhere past relief into something quieter and more permanent. "You went and talked him into this," he said. "I gave him the information he needed to make his own decision," she said. "He made it." "You have a way of doing that," Caleb said. "Doing what?" "Giving people exactly what they need to make the right choice." He said it simply, without decoration. And then stepping back and letting them make it. Clara looked at him for a moment. She thought about what to say. Then she said, "That's what my mother called respecting a person's dignity. She said the biggest disrespect you could show someone was making their choices for them." She paused. She was a very difficult woman to argue with. Caleb almost smiled. "I believe it," he said. "The petition needs to go to Judge Morris immediately," Clara said, bringing them back to the work. "He's sitting in Benson right now before he moves to the Millard Creek session. That's 60 miles. If Santos leaves tonight..." "Santos left 3 weeks ago to handle the Copper Ridge mail," Caleb said. "Let me take this one." Clara looked at him. "You want to ride to Benson tonight?" "I want to put this in the judge's hands myself," he said. "This is my land, my father's claim. I want to be the one who carries it." She held his gaze for a moment. "All right," she said. But you take Hector with you. You don't ride out alone while someone is cutting your fences at night." "Agreed," he said. "And you come straight back. Don't stop in any town along the way longer than necessary." "Clara," he said, and something in his voice made her stop. "What?" she said. "I'm going to come back," he said, not as reassurance, as a statement of fact made directly in the particular tone of a man who means things plainly. "I know what you're not saying. I know you're thinking about what happens if Vale finds out we sent the petition before he can respond." He held her eyes. "I'm going to come back. And when I do, this is either going to be over or it's going to be the beginning of the end of it. But I'm going to come back." Clara looked at him. She thought about a woman who had learned a long time ago not to count on people coming back. She thought about the particular armor that knowledge built and how useful that armor had always been, and how strange it felt right now in this kitchen to be looking at a man and finding the armor insufficient. "I know you are," she said, and she meant it. He left at dusk with Hector riding beside him and the petition in his saddlebag, and Clara stood in the back doorway and watched them go until she couldn't see them anymore. Then she went back to the study and kept working, because the petition being delivered was one thing and what happened after was another, and there was still a circuit court presentation to prepare whether the emergency motion was granted or not. Santos appeared in the doorway at 9 o'clock. "You should eat something," he said. "I ate at noon." That was not eating. That was drinking coffee while standing near food. Clara looked up. Santos's face was absolutely serious. She felt something loosen slightly in her chest, the precise involuntary response to being cared about by someone who was not going to make a performance of it. "Thank you, Santos," she said. "There is cornbread," he said. "And I made beans again because it's what I make when I'm worried." "Then I'll eat twice as much," she said, "so you feel useful." Santos's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. He went back to the kitchen. Clara put down her pen and followed him. Caleb and Hector returned on Friday morning. Caleb came into the kitchen with dust on his coat and tiredness around his eyes, and the particular controlled energy of a man carrying news he was managing the shape of before he released it. "Judge Morris read it," he said. Clara stood up. He read the petition and Perch's statement and the survey evidence. Caleb set his hat on the table. "He's granting the emergency hearing, 2 weeks from Monday, in Millard Creek." He paused. He also issued a temporary restraining order on the note foreclosure proceedings pending the hearing. Clara's hands went still on the table. "The note can't be acted on," she said. "Not until after the hearing," Caleb said. "Not legally." She sat down. She sat down, not because she was weak, but because the tension that had been holding her upright for 3 weeks needed somewhere to go, and sitting down was the only dignified option available. "That's the first time anything in this territory has gone the right way," she said. "Yeah," Caleb said. He sat down across from her. He looked at her face, all the way at her face, not past it or around it, but directly at her, the way he'd looked at the ranch from the wagon road on her first day with that specific and serious attention. "You all right?" "Yes," she said. "I'm yes." She put her hands flat on the table. 2 weeks. 2 weeks, he said. "We need to prepare the full presentation," she said. "Everything organized for the judge. The fraudulent filing, the Albright connection, the note chain, the survey purchase statement. I want a narrative summary the judge can follow without having to reconstruct the timeline himself." She was already reaching for her pen. "And we need to notify the federal office in Prescott that the emergency hearing is scheduled, so their record reflects the local proceeding." "Clara," Caleb said. She looked up. "You've been working on this for 3 weeks straight," he said. "The petition is filed. The restraining order is in place. The hearing is in 2 weeks." He looked at her steadily. "Take one afternoon." She looked at him. "One afternoon," he said. "The work will still be there at sundown." She thought about the narrative summary, and the Prescott notification, and the 3 remaining questions in her notes that still needed answers. She thought about all of that, and then she looked at Caleb Whitaker across the kitchen table, and she thought about a man who had ridden 60 miles in the dark to put her work in a judge's hands and come back. "One afternoon," she said. He almost smiled. "Come see the North Pasture," he said. "The summer grasses, you haven't been up there yet." "You said no scene description?" she said, very nearly teasing. He blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Nothing," she said. She stood up. "Show me the North Pasture." They walked up to the North Pasture in the afternoon heat, and Clara understood for the first time what Caleb had meant on the wagon road when he'd said it was a good piece of land, with something in his voice that was more complicated than pride. Standing on the upper rise with the summer spread out in every direction, and Silver Pine Ranch below them, and the passage mouth cutting through the ridge to the north, she understood what his father had understood in 1861 when he'd had this land surveyed and filed the claim proper and meant it to last. She understood what Vale wanted. Not because she didn't understand it from the documents, she'd understood it from the documents from the beginning. But there was a difference between understanding something in figures and understanding it in the particular quality of afternoon air, and the sound of cattle below, and the knowledge that this piece of earth connected every ranch on the upper mountain to the rest of the world. "My father brought my mother up here when they first settled," Caleb said. He was standing a foot to her left, looking north. "He said she stood right about where you're standing and said it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever been afraid of." "Afraid of?" Clara said. "She was a city woman," he said. "Philadelphia. She'd never seen country like this." He paused. "She said the size of it scared her. But then she said the size of it was exactly the point. That you couldn't build something small out here even if you tried." Clara looked at the passage mouth in the ridge. "She was right about that," she said. "She built the school in Millard Creek," Caleb said. "Organized it herself, raised the money, hired the first teacher. She said a community without a school was just people living near each other." He was quiet for a moment. "My father used to say she was the real reason Silver Pine worked. The land was his, but the life on it was hers." Clara thought about Margaret. She didn't say the name out loud. She didn't need to. But she thought about a woman who had been here in this place and had built something alongside a man who now stood in the afternoon quiet and carried her in the particular way that people carried the people they'd loved well. "What was she like?" Clara asked. "Margaret." Caleb was quiet long enough that she thought she'd overstepped. Then he said, "She laughed easily. More than anyone I've known. She thought most things were funny, including me, which was good because I don't always know when I'm being serious when I shouldn't be." He paused. "She was brave in the way that looks like calmness. You'd watch her in a hard situation and think she wasn't afraid, and later she'd tell you she was terrified the whole time, but she'd decided the fear wasn't more important than what needed doing." Clara felt something move through her chest, something warm and a little painful. "That's the best kind of brave there is," she said. "Yeah," Caleb said. He turned and looked at her. "She would have told me to look at my ledgers," he said. "She would have caught this years ago." "Maybe," Clara said. "But she wasn't here, and you were doing it alone." "I wasn't good at asking for help," he said. "You asked me," Clara said. He held her gaze. "I lifted your suitcase off a warped board," he said. "That's not the same as asking for help." "It's how it started," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, a slow and deliberate movement. Like weather changing on a mountain. You could see it coming if you were paying attention, and Clara had always paid attention. "Clara," he said. "Caleb," she said in a tone that was careful and honest, and kept both of them in the same careful space. I know the situation is what it is," he said. "You came here under someone else's promise, and it fell through, and you've been here 3 weeks fighting for my land." "Our case," she corrected quietly. "Our case," he said. He let that sit. "I don't know what you're going to do after the hearing. I don't have a claim on that. You set your terms from the start, and I respected them, and I still do." He looked at the passage mouth in the ridge, then back at her. "I just want you to know that what you've done here, what you've been doing, it isn't just the accounts. It's..." He stopped. Then very simply, You made me remember why this land is worth fighting for. I'd forgotten. I was running the operation, but I'd stopped believing in it." His voice was even, but something underneath it was not. "You gave that back to me." Clara looked at him. She thought about $11.40 and a cracked suitcase handle and 30 people laughing at a letter. She thought about 4 months of correspondence and a promise that turned out to be ink on paper. She thought about the kind of trust it took to sit across a kitchen table from a stranger at midnight and show him a 3-year trap built around his life's work. "You gave me a table with good light and a south-facing window," she said. "And you told a crowd of strangers I deserved dignity." She held his eyes. Don't underestimate what that was worth to someone who'd stopped expecting it. He looked at her. The afternoon held still around them. "After the hearing," he said carefully, like a man placing weight on ice to test it, "I'd like to ask you something. Not before. Not while there's still a fight that isn't settled. But after." "After," Clara said, equally carefully. "Yes, ask me then." He nodded. He looked at the passage mouth one more time, and something in his face was cleaner than it had been in weeks. "We should go back down," he said. "We should," she said. They walked back down the rise toward Silver Pine, and the afternoon held its heat around them, and neither of them said anything more because there wasn't anything more to say. Yet there would be after, but not yet. And the particular quality of the silence between them was different from any silence Clara had experienced in a long time. It was the silence of something beginning. The trouble came 4 days before the hearing. Santos found it first another man not watching the road this time, but at the South Water Gate. He came back and told Caleb, and Caleb told Clara, and Clara looked at the timing and understood immediately. "He can't stop the hearing," she said. "The restraining order is in place. So he's going to try to destabilize the operation enough that you look bad going in." She paused. "He's going to come into town, publicly, before the hearing. He's going to make his version of this story the one people hear first." Caleb looked at her. "He's going to come after you," he said. "Not me. You." "Yes," she said. "I've been a problem he didn't expect. He'll try to make me the issue instead of the evidence." She met his eyes. "He'll say I'm a stranger who arrived under false pretenses and has inserted herself into a business dispute for reasons that benefit her. He'll say the documents have been misread or misrepresented. He'll say Perch has a personal grievance against the bank." She paused. "He'll say all of it in a public setting where the judge can't control the audience." "The Harvest Festival," Caleb said quietly. Clara looked at him. "The summer harvest gathering is Saturday," he said. 3 days before the hearing, every rancher in the county comes in. Every family, the whole territory." He held her gaze. "If he's going to make a public move, that's when he does it." Clara took a slow breath. She thought about 30 people on a depot platform. She thought about a woman in a yellow dress and a man in a brown coat, and the sound of not quite laughter and a letter held against her chest like a shield. She thought about what she had now that she hadn't had then. "All right," she said. "Then we go to the Harvest Festival too." Caleb looked at her carefully. "You understand what that means," he said. "He'll come at you in front of everyone." "I know," she said. "And you want to be there anyway." "Caleb," she said, "I didn't come 1,500 miles to hide in a study." She straightened. "I have the documents. I have Perch's statement. I have the certified survey. He can say whatever he wants to say in public. Documents don't change because someone makes a speech." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'll be right next to you." "I know you will," she said. Santos appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at both of them. "I'll press your good jacket," he said to Caleb, and to Clara, "I'll iron the blue dress." Clara blinked. "I didn't know you knew about the blue dress." "I do the laundry," Santos said, with the dignity of a man who considers this self-explanatory, and went back to the kitchen. Clara looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Clara. And in spite of everything, the fence and the water gate and the man on horseback, and 3 days until a public confrontation that could go either way, something almost like a smile found its way onto her face. "He ironed your jacket," she said. 11 years, Caleb said. "He knows where everything is." Clara laughed. It was a small sound, real and sudden, and it surprised her the way real things often did. 3 days until the harvest festival. 4 days until the hearing. Silver Pine was still standing, and they were going to walk into that gathering side by side with the truth in a traveling bag and the record behind them. And Harrison Vale was going to learn what happened when the person he'd written off as a stranger turned out to be the one person in the territory who'd read every document he'd tried to hide. Clara picked up her pen. She had preparation to finish. The morning of the Harvest Festival, Clara woke before dawn and lay still in the dark for exactly 3 minutes, taking inventory of everything that could go wrong. It was a habit from the law firm her former employer had called it catastrophic mapping, the practice of naming every failure mode before you walked into a room so that none of them could surprise you. She'd used it before difficult client meetings, before complex filings, before every situation where someone else's choices would determine the outcome of her own careful work. She ran through the list. Vale would speak first if he could manage it. He'd want to set the narrative before she had a chance to offer evidence. He'd attack her credibility, her presence in the territory, her relationship to Caleb. He'd make the story about her character, rather than about documents, because documents were harder to argue with than a woman's reputation. He'd have allies in the crowd, people who owed him money or favors or both, and those allies would nod and murmur at the right moments to make his version feel like consensus. She'd seen this technique in Boston courtrooms. She'd watched senior partners use it against opposing witnesses. It was effective when the audience didn't have access to the underlying record. The difference here was that she intended to give them access to the underlying record. She got up and dressed in the blue dress Santos had ironed, and she put the traveling bag with the documents on the chair by the door. And she went to the kitchen and found Caleb already there in the good jacket Santos had pressed, drinking coffee, with the particular focused stillness of a man preparing himself for something difficult. He looked at her when she came in. "You slept," he said. "Some," she said. He poured her coffee without being asked. She sat down and wrapped both hands around the cup, and they sat across from each other in the early morning quiet of Silver Pine's kitchen. And neither of them spoke for a few minutes, and that was all right. They had gotten very good at the kind of silence that was actually communication. "Whatever happens today," Caleb said finally. "I know," Clara said. "I mean it," he said. "Whatever happens. This land, what you've done for it, that doesn't go away regardless of how the next 2 days go. It's going to go well," Clara said. She said it not as reassurance, but as assessment, the same way she stated any conclusion she'd reasoned her way to. "We have the evidence. We have the structure. We have Perch's statement, and the certified survey, and the fraud filing. Vale has a speech, and some people who owe him favors." She looked at him. "Evidence beats speeches. Every time." Caleb looked at her over his coffee cup. "You sound certain." "I am certain," she said. "Being frightened and being certain aren't the same thing. I can be both." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you frightened?" She considered the honest answer. "Of the crowd," she said. "Not of Vale. I understand Vale. I've read everything he's put on paper, and I know exactly what kind of man makes those kinds of choices, but crowds—" She paused. "Crowds are unpredictable, and I've stood in front of a crowd in this territory before, and it didn't go well." "That was before," Caleb said. "I know," she said. "That was before they knew you," he said. "Before they'd seen before the fence and the records office and Perch. People talk in a town this size." He held her eyes. "They know more than you think." Clara looked at him. She thought about the woman in the yellow dress and the not quite laugh, and she thought about Santos saying, "I do the laundry," as if that explained everything, and she thought about Hector on the north fence line in the dark with his lantern moving steady, and she thought about a store owner in Copper Ridge who'd given her the wrong address to test her. "Santos is coming," she said. "Santos, Hector, and Ames," Caleb said. They asked. Clara set her coffee cup down. She pressed her lips together for a moment because she needed to, and then she said, "All right, let's go." The Harvest Festival in Millard Creek was held in the open ground behind the feed store and the church, and by 10 in the morning, it was full ranchers from the upper mountain and the South Range families from the outlying farms, merchants from town, the school teacher Mrs. Aldrich, who had taken over the school that Caleb's mother had founded 30 years ago. The summer heat was already building, and the crowd moved through it with the particular ease of people accustomed to it, and the noise of it was the specific noise of a community that has gathered for celebration and is managing not to notice the tension underneath. Clara walked in beside Caleb and felt the shift in the crowd's attention the moment they entered. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't like a room going silent. It was subtler than that. A series of small redirections eyes, moving conversations pausing for half a beat. The particular awareness that moves through a group of people when something they've been talking about privately has just walked through the door. She kept her chin level and her pace steady and her traveling bag on her arm. Santos had positioned himself to their left almost immediately. Hector and Ames took up natural positions a few feet back. Clara noticed this without looking directly at any of them, and felt something settle in her chest that she recognized after a moment as the feeling of not being alone. Harrison Vale found them within 15 minutes. She had expected that. A man who planned 3.5 years ahead did not wait for things to come to him. He was taller than she'd expected from the way people described him, broad-shouldered, well-dressed, with the kind of face that had probably been handsome once and had settled into authority instead. He moved through the crowd with the ease of a man who was used to rooms making way for him, and the crowd did make way, which told Clara exactly what the social architecture of Millard Creek looked like when Harrison Vale was present. He stopped in front of Caleb. He didn't look at Clara immediately, which told her he'd already decided on his approach. "Whitaker," he said. His voice was the kind of voice that carried without effort. "Vale," Caleb said. "Nothing else." "I understand you've been busy," Vale said, still not looking at Clara. "Filing motions, visiting records offices." He let a measured pause do some work. "Making arrangements with outside parties who have an interest in causing trouble for established operations in this county." "I've been establishing the legal record of my land claim," Caleb said, "which my father filed in 1861, which has always been mine." "Your father filed a claim in 1861, Vale said pleasantly. "Claims from 1861 are subject to territorial review. Boundaries shift. Assessments are updated." He shrugged the gesture of a man discussing something ordinary. "Your note is a matter of public record, Whitaker. Your financial position is well known. These things happen in ranching." "The note is fraudulent," Caleb said. Silence expanded outward from that sentence in all directions. Not total silence. The festival continued around them, but the particular attention of the 30 or 40 people within earshot who had suddenly found reasons to be standing still. Vale looked at Caleb with the expression of a man practicing patience with someone he considers slow. "That's a serious accusation," he said. "It's a documented one," Clara said. Vale looked at her for the first time. She had been waiting for it. She held his gaze without moving and without adjusting her expression, and she watched him make the same calculation men like him always made when they looked at her, the rapid assessment of threat level based on appearance and apparent social standing, the conclusion that she was manageable. She had watched men make that calculation for 6 years in a law firm in Boston. They had always been wrong. "Miss Bennett," Vale said, "I understand you've had a difficult situation since your arrival in the territory. I don't hold that against you." He said it with the specific warmth of a man who is performing generosity in front of witnesses. "But I'd encourage you to consider whether you fully understand the arrangements you've become involved in. These are matters of territorial law and established business practice. The Territorial Land and Water Company was not registered as a legal entity on the date Commissioner Albright filed the water rights objection on its behalf," Clara said. The warmth in Vale's expression did not disappear, but something behind it went very still. "The objection was filed on April the 3rd, 1881. Clara continued. Her voice was even and clear, and carried without effort to everyone who was pretending not to listen. The Territorial Land and Water Company was registered on April the 24th, 1881, 3 weeks later. She opened her traveling bag. I have a certified copy of both documents from the Territorial Records Office in Copper Ridge. The filing date and the registration date are on the face of the documents. She held them up. Vale looked at the documents in her hand. Something moved in his face, very small, very controlled, but she'd been watching for it, and she saw it. Documents can be misread, he said, or misrepresented. They can, Clara said, which is why these are certified copies stamped and signed by the records office clerk with the file reference numbers on the back that can be verified by any party at any time. She turned and looked at the crowd. The people who had been pretending not to listen, who were now openly listening, who were looking at the documents in her hand and at Harrison Vale's face. I also have the original 1861 survey of the Whitaker land claim certified by the Territorial Surveyor's Office, showing the northwestern boundary running through the passage mouth. That boundary has not changed. The claim has not lapsed. And any assessment ordered through Commissioner Albright's office that contradicts that survey was ordered in furtherance of a fraud. Vale took one step forward. He was still composed. She had to give him that. He was a disciplined man, but the composure had a different quality now. It was working harder. You are a woman who arrived in this territory 3 weeks ago without resources, without position, without any established connection to this community, he said. His voice had dropped slightly, become more intimate, directed more at her than at the crowd. You accepted a situation of dependence in a household under financial distress, and you are now representing that distress as fraud rather than mismanagement because it serves your position in that household. He let that land. I would ask anyone here to consider the source of these accusations. Clara felt the moment the way she felt a shift in balance, the crowd's attention moving people calculating the old instinct to assess a woman by her circumstances rather than her evidence. She'd been waiting for this, too. Gerald Perch, she said. She said it clearly. She said it to the crowd, not to Vale. Perch stepped forward from somewhere to her left. She hadn't known exactly where he was standing, and she hadn't looked for him, because looking for him would have shown uncertainty, and she was not uncertain. She'd told him only that she intended to be at the festival, and that if he wanted to be there, the choice was his. He'd made it. He looked pale, but he was standing straight, and when he spoke his voice was steady in the way of a man who has decided that the steadiness costs less than the alternative. My name is Gerald Perch, he said. I'm a loan officer at the First Territorial Bank of Millard Creek. In August of 1881, I delivered a note to the Silver Pine Ranch at the instruction of Commissioner Albright. I was told to present the note under a deadline created by a county land board ruling. He paused. The county land board meets on Wednesdays. I delivered the note on a Saturday. When I asked Albright about the timing, he told me the ruling had been filed Friday. I did not question it further. Another pause. I am stating now in front of witnesses that the deadline I represented to Mr. Whitaker was not supported by a legitimate land board ruling, and that Commissioner Albright instructed me to execute the note before Mr. Whitaker had the opportunity to speak with anyone in the Territorial Records Office. The crowd had gone genuinely quiet now. Not the pretending not to listen quiet. The real kind. Vale turned to look at Perch. Clara watched his face through the turn and saw the thing that powerful men showed briefly and involuntarily when the structure they'd built was failing. Not fear exactly, something older than fear, the animal recognition of ground shifting underfoot. Perch, Vale said. His voice had gone flat. You're making a serious mistake. I made the serious mistake 3 years ago, Perch said. I'm correcting it now. Someone in the crowd made a sound. Not a laugh. Something more complicated the sound a crowd makes when it's processing a change in what it believed was true. The woman in the yellow dress, Clara noticed her for the first time since the depot platform, standing near the church wall, had gone very still. She was looking at Clara, not with amusement, with something that might have been recognition. Vale turned back to Clara. He was still standing straight, still composed, but the quality of the composure had changed entirely. It was the composure of retreat, not of confidence. "Whatever you believe these documents show," he said, "this will be settled in court." "Yes," Clara said. "It will. In front of Judge Morris on Monday morning. And the Federal Land Commissioner's office in Prescott has also received copies of the complete evidence file." She held his gaze. "I encourage you to bring your own documentation. The judge will want to see everything." Vale looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Caleb. Caleb had not moved and had not spoken since the moment Clara had produced the documents, and he was standing with the particular stillness of a man who has understood that what is happening in front of him does not require him to make it bigger. He met Vale's eyes evenly. "My father built this land," Caleb said, quietly, not to the crowd, to Vale. "He filed the claim right and built the operation right, and he built it to last. You've spent 3.5 years trying to take it from me because you thought I wouldn't see it until it was too late." He paused. "You were right that I didn't see it. You were wrong about what that meant." Vale said nothing. "We'll see you Monday," Caleb said. Vale turned and walked away through the crowd, which parted for him the same way it had when he arrived, but with a different quality to it. The crowd that parted for him now was not deferring. It was stepping back. There is a difference between those two things that everyone present understood. The silence after Vale left lasted about 4 seconds. Then the festival noise resumed, but it resumed differently with the particular energy of a community that has just collectively revised its understanding of something it thought it knew. Perch stood where he'd stood when he spoke. He looked like a man who had just done something he wasn't entirely sure how to feel about and was waiting to find out if it had been right. Clara walked over to him. "Thank you," she said. "I should have done it sooner," he said. "Yes," she said. "But you did it now." He looked at her for a moment. "You knew I'd be here," he said. "I hoped you would be," she said. "I didn't know." He nodded slowly. "What happens Monday?" "Monday I present the evidence to Judge Morris, and you give your testimony," she said. "Bring everything you remember about Albright's instructions. Dates, language, anything specific. Write it down tonight while today is fresh." She met his eyes. "You'll be all right, Mr. Perch?" He looked like he wasn't entirely sure of that, but he nodded and stepped back into the crowd. Clara turned and found Caleb directly behind her, close enough that the turn brought them face to face, at a distance she hadn't quite anticipated. He looked at her with an expression that had no armor in it at all. "Clara," he said. "The hearing is Monday," she said. "We still have 2 days of preparation." "Clara," he said again, and something in the repetition of her name asked her to stop, so she stopped. "All right," she said. "I've been thinking about what I said on the North Pasture," he said, "about asking you something after the hearing." "Yes," she said carefully. "I'm not going to wait until after," he said. "I thought I should. I thought the right thing was to wait until the legal situation was resolved and you had a clear picture of what you were dealing with and could make a free choice." He looked at her steadily. "But Vale just tried to use your situation against you in front of the whole town. He called you a woman without position or resources who was acting to serve her situation in someone else's household." His voice was even, but underneath it was not. "And I realized I can't let that stand another 2 days without making my position clear, not to the town." He held her eyes. "To you." Clara held very still. "You have a position in this territory," Caleb said, "if you want it. You have a place at Silver Pine that doesn't depend on the legal situation, or my financial situation, or what this town thinks about a woman who came west under someone else's promise." He paused. "I'm asking you to stay. Not as an employee. Not as I'm asking you, as the woman who sat in my study at 4 in the morning and found what I couldn't find, and who told me my choice on a train platform mattered, and who learned Margaret's name, and said she would have been furious on my behalf." His voice caught just slightly the way a thing catches when it's carrying more than it's used to. "I'm asking you to stay, Because this ranch is better with you in it. And I am better with you in it. And I think you know that's true. The festival went on around them. People were moving, talking, eating, the ordinary sound of a summer gathering in a territory that would still be here long after this particular moment. And in the middle of it, Caleb Whitaker stood in his pressed jacket with his hat in his hands and looked at Clara Bennett with the whole honest weight of what he meant. Clara thought about Boston. She thought about a law firm and 6 years and a nephew with the right last name. She thought about a correspondence agency and 4 months of letters and a train platform and a letter she'd folded along its original creases and put in her bag with her hands not shaking. She thought about $11.40 and a south-facing window and a kitchen table and 3 years of ledgers that told a story nobody had been willing to read until she sat down with them. She thought about standing on the north pasture with her heart doing something she hadn't given it permission to do. "Caleb," she said. "Yes," he said. "I set terms," she said. "From the beginning. My own room. Respect. Honesty. No pretending I belong somewhere I don't." "I remember," he said. "I need to add one more term," she said. He waited. "I need you to understand that I am not staying because I have nowhere else to go," she said. "I left Boston because I chose to. I've stayed in this territory because I chose to. Everything I've done at Silver Pine I've done because I chose to." She held his eyes. "If I stay, if I say yes to what you're asking, it's because I'm choosing it, not because the alternative is $11 and a cracked suitcase." "I know that," he said. "Do you?" "Clara," he said quietly, and with absolute certainty, "you are the least helpless person I have ever met in my life." Something broke open in her chest, not painfully, the way a window breaks open in spring suddenly and with an enormous amount of light. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "Yes, you know I understand that," or, "Yes, I'm staying," she said. "Yes to what you're asking, yes." Caleb Whitaker stood in front of Clara Bennett in the middle of the Millard Creek Summer Harvest Festival, and he reached out and took her hand, and he held it the way a man holds something he knows the value of carefully and with full intention, and without any plan to let go. Santos, standing approximately 15 feet away, and pretending to look at a display of preserved fruit, allowed himself a small and private expression of satisfaction. Hector beside him noticed it, and said nothing, because Hector had been watching Silver Pine hold itself together for 3 weeks, and understood that this moment had been earned. Mid. Judge Harlan Morris arrived in Millard Creek on Monday morning and heard the matter of Whitaker versus the First Territorial Bank and Harrison Vale in the county courthouse with all the efficiency of a man who has read the evidence packet the night before and already formed a view. Clara presented the case in 2 hours. She did not speak the way a lawyer speaks, she hadn't been trained for that, and didn't pretend otherwise. She spoke the way she'd been trained to speak in 6 years of a law firm, clearly in order with the documents supporting each statement and the timeline visible to anyone paying attention. She put the fraudulent company filing first, the Albright connection second, the false deadline and purchase testimony third, the note chain fourth, the 1861 survey fifth. Perch testified to the Saturday delivery and Albright's specific instruction. He said the word before 3 times before Whitaker spoke to anyone in Copper Ridge, and the judge's pen moved each time he said it. Vale's representative, a lawyer from Tucson who had ridden hard to get there, challenged the survey dating and Perch's credibility and the interpretation of the company filing date. He was good. Clara had expected him to be good. She had prepared for a good lawyer. When the lawyer argued that the company filing and the county objection filing on the same general date was coincidence rather than evidence of fraud. Clara set the registration document beside the objection filing on the table in front of the judge and said, "The objection was filed April 3rd. The company was registered April 24th. Commissioner Albright filed the objection 3 weeks before the company he was acting for existed. That is not a matter of interpretation. That is a matter of dates." Judge Morris looked at the documents for a long moment. Then he looked at Vale's lawyer. "Counsel," he said. "I'm going to need a very compelling explanation for that." The explanation, when it came, was not compelling. The judge ruled in 2 days. Not immediately, he was thorough, and the matter was complex, and he wrote an opinion that was 14 pages long, which Clara read 3 times in the study at Silver Pine the evening Santos brought it back from town. The note was voided. The collateral arrangement on the northwestern parcel was declared unenforceable. Commissioner Albright was referred to the territorial governor's office for investigation of his conduct in the matter. The First Territorial Bank was ordered to return the interest paid on the fraudulent notes. The boundary of the Silver Pine land claim was confirmed as documented in the 1861 survey. Clara set the opinion down on the kitchen table and put her hands flat on it and breathed. Caleb was standing in the doorway. "Well," he said. She looked at him. "We won," she said. He crossed the kitchen in 4 steps, and she stood up, and he put his arms around her, and she let him, and she put her face against the side of his jaw, and felt his hand come up to the back of her head. And they stood there in the kitchen of Silver Pine Ranch, holding the weight of the last 4 weeks, and all the weight before it, and neither of them said anything, because there wasn't a single word that would have added anything to what was already true. Santos appeared in the doorway, saw them, and backed away quietly. He went and told Hector and Ames, who were waiting in the yard, that the news was good, and Hector took his hat off and held it against his chest for a moment, and Ames said something in a low voice that made Hector almost smile. Silver Pine held. 3 months passed. The way months pass when a life is being built rather than defended quickly, with the particular fullness of days that have purpose in them. The second hay cutting came in strong. The cattle on the north pasture came through the summer healthy. The note payments that had been draining Silver Pine's operating margin were gone, and Clara reorganized the accounts in the first weeks after the ruling, and showed Caleb what the operation actually looked like when it wasn't being bled dry by fraudulent debt. He sat at the kitchen table and learned to read his own ledgers. He was a slow student, and he was stubborn about it, which she had expected, and she was precise and direct in her corrections, which he seemed to expect from her. And somewhere in the 3rd week of that particular education, he looked up from a column of figures and said, "You're a very difficult teacher." "You're a very resistant student," she said. "I've been running cattle since I was 12, he said. "I don't need to be told. You need to understand the difference between revenue and income," she said. Again. He looked at her. She looked at him. He looked back at the ledger. "Revenue," he said, and she heard the almost smile in his voice, "is the total before expenses." "And income," she said, "is what's left," he said, "after." "Good," she said. Again. The woman in the yellow dress came to Silver Pine in September. Her name was Eleanor Cates, and she had a farm 6 miles east of town, and she came with a jar of preserved peaches and the specific courage of someone doing something they should have done earlier and know it. She stood in the doorway and held out the peaches and said, "I was at the train station in July. I didn't say anything, and I should have." She looked at Clara directly. "I'm sorry for that." Clara looked at her for a moment. She thought about not quite laughter and a woman who had said quietly, "I don't think she's a stray." She thought about what it cost someone to come back and say a thing like that. "Come in," Clara said. "Santos just made coffee." Eleanor Cates came in. Santos made 3 cups. The circuit judge's opinion on the Albright matter came down in October. The commissioner was removed from his position pending a full investigation. The territorial governor's letter arrived 2 weeks later, referencing the federal complaint filed in August and confirming that the land and water company's operations were under review. Harrison Vale did not leave the territory. But the particular quality of his presence in Millard Creek changed the way a large thing changes when everyone in a room has understood what it actually is. He still owned land. He still ran cattle. But the ease with which he'd moved through the county, the automatic deference the way rooms had made space for him, that was gone, and it did not come back. Perch kept his position at the bank. The bank's new president, A man from Phoenix, brought in after the investigation, found several irregularities in the lending committee's processes, was making changes. Perch was cooperating with all of them. He came to Silver Pine once in late September and asked to speak with Clara. She met him at the kitchen table with coffee, the way she met everyone. He said, "I've been thinking about what you said, that I made a choice and what kind of man it made me." He held his cup in both hands. "I'm still figuring out what kind of man I want to be." "That's honest," Clara said. "It's a start, I reckon," he said. "It is," she said. He left and she watched him go from the kitchen window, and she thought about the particular mercy of second chances, not the sentimental kind, but the real kind, the kind that required something from the person receiving it. On a Thursday evening in October, when the heat had finally released its hold on the mountain, and the air coming off the ridge had the first real edge of autumn in it, Caleb found Clara in the study, going over the updated accounts. He stood in the doorway for a moment. She felt him there and looked up. "Done for the day," he said. "Almost," she said. He came in and sat in the chair across from her, the chair that had become his chair in the way that things became defined by use, and he looked at her over the lamp with the expression she had long since stopped trying to classify and had simply come to know as his face when he was entirely present. "I want to say something," he said. "All right," she said. "I thought when you first came to Silver Pine that I was doing you a kindness," he said. "That first day, I thought I was offering a practical arrangement to someone in a difficult situation." "You were," she said. "I thought I was the one doing the offering," he said. "I didn't understand yet what you were going to do." He paused. "For this land. For me." He looked at her steadily. "I thought I was saving you that day at the station." Clara set her pen down. "But you were the one who saved me," he said. She looked at him across the lamp. She thought about all the ways that was true and all the ways it wasn't quite right, because the truth of it was more complicated and more equal than a single direction of rescue. "I think," she said carefully, "that we saved each other. And I think that's actually better." Caleb looked at her. That thing happened in his expression, the one that had started as something she couldn't name and had become over 3 months the most familiar sight in her daily life. The one that meant, "I see you exactly as you are, and I am not going anywhere." "Yeah," he said. "I think you're right." Outside, the first real night of autumn was coming down over the mountain. The cattle on the north pasture were settled. Hector's lantern was still no need for the midnight watch anymore, the threat on the fence line long since resolved. Santos had banked the stove and gone to his quarters. The house was quiet, in the way a house is quiet when it is at peace with itself. Clara picked up her pen and looked at the ledger in front of her. The clean columns, the honest figures, a ranch that knew what it had and what it owed and what it was worth. Then she looked at Caleb. "Come look at something," she said. He leaned forward. She turned the ledger toward him and pointed to the bottom of the October column. He looked at the figure, and she watched his face while he understood what it meant, that for the first time in 3 years, the number at the bottom of Silver Pine's accounts was not red, but black, not loss, but margin, not debt, but the beginning of something that could grow. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at her. And Clara Bennett, who had arrived in the Arizona Territory under a broken promise with $11.40 and a cracked suitcase handle, looked back at the man sitting across from her in the lamplight of a kitchen that had become the most familiar place she had ever lived, and she felt something she recognized now, without any of the old uncertainty. She was home. Not because she had nowhere else to go, because she had chosen it. Because the best homes, the real ones, the ones that last, are never the places you fall into by accident. They are the places you fight your way toward alongside the right person until you have earned the right to call them yours. Silver Pine Ranch was hers, and she was exactly where she was meant to be.